Hello and welcome to the BYU Library Family History webinar. We're glad you could join us today. I'm Olivia Tudler and I'll be your host for this webinar. If you have technical difficulties during the webinar, please use the chat box and I can address your concerns. You are welcome to use the chat box during the webinar for comments, insights, and questions. However, all questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Our next webinar is on January 22nd with Bob Taylor on new training tools in the Family History Guide. If you would like to access a previous webinar, please visit our webinar index on our website or search on our YouTube channel. All of our webinars are recorded and uploaded by the following Monday for your convenience. We also post links to recordings and other updates on our Facebook and Twitter accounts. For today's webinar, we are pleased to hear from Kathryn Grant on FamilySearch date and place standards, basics and beyond. Before we begin, here's a little bit about Kathryn. After years on the sidelines, Kathryn began doing family history. Somewhat to her surprise, she discovered that she loved it. Her specialty is helping new family historians find success and maybe even avoid some of the mistakes she's made. Kathryn teaches Sunday classes at the BYU Library Family History Center and presents at other family history events. Her column on family history ran in the Nauvoo Times for about a year and is still available online. In addition, she's a regular contributor to the FamilySearch blog. Kathryn works as a technical writer and instructional designer with a focus on usability and process improvement. Her current work assignment includes developing training used on mobile devices. Besides family history, she loves uplifting music, thought-provoking books, and real maple syrup. And we'll now turn the time over to Kathryn.
Great. Olivia, thanks so much. So we'll share the screen here. Okay, you should be able to see my screen. So everybody, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar today on FamilySearch date and place standards. This is a very helpful feature of FamilySearch, but it's one of the more technical features, I would say. In that it requires, well, it's got some nuances to it. So it's not difficult to use, but there are some details to it that are helpful to understand when trying to use it. So that's what we hope to go into today. So here's what we've got on our agenda. First thing, we'll talk about standards, what they are and why we need them. Second, we'll walk through entering standardized dates, followed by entering standardized places, and then we'll wrap up with an example of fixing incorrect standards. So here is an example. This is some genealogical information on a woman named Sylvia Novak. Go ahead, since we don't have audio participation on this webinar, please put in the chat when you think Sylvia was born and where she was born. So I'm going to open up the chat here and watch the answers. Or if you see any problems with this information, put that in the chat. Yes, very good. Georgia the state or Georgia the country? Do you see any other issues? What century, Jim? Very good. '09 is not helpful to genealogists because we're working in multiple centuries. Gordon brings up a good point. So some countries have the one being the month, but others have the one being the date, and the second digit is the month, like they're flip-flopped in different countries. So Gordon says, is that the 1st of March or is it the 3rd of January? We don't know. Terrell points out that the date format is not helpful. Wendy says, tough to tell the birth. What year is it? What day and month? Exactly. Jenilyn says the same thing. You guys are awesome. You pointed out the problems. So January 3rd or March 1st, we don't know. What century? We don't know. Are they talking about Georgia, a state in the US, the country in Eastern Europe? Or when I was Googling this, I found out there is a city in Indiana named Georgia. So if we have any Indiana people on the line, you probably knew that. But the rest of us might look at that and go, I don't know where this person was really born or when. Okay, let's look at another example. For those of you who either are from the UK or have done UK research, you may recognize the first two, and Gordon will probably recognize the third one. But for the rest of us, if we saw these abbreviations in family history, would we know what to make of them? These are the kinds of things that if you're from the place, you know what they are, but if you're not from the place, then you could be confused or puzzled about them. So this just surprised me greatly when I found out. I saw Salop on, I think it was on census records, and I had to Google and find out it's actually an old abbreviation for the county of Shropshire, say in England. Same thing for Oxon, it's an old abbreviation for the county of Oxfordshire. To make it even more complicated, sometimes Oxford will just be used for the abbreviation for the county, but it's also a city within the county of Oxfordshire. And then we have PQ, which Gordon's from Canada, my cousin who's on the line. If I'm wrong in what I'm saying, please correct me. But I Googled this and they said that PQ was an old abbreviation meaning Province of Quebec, but according to the postal website in Canada, they don't prefer to have this abbreviation used anymore, but you might still run across it in genealogical records. So the point of showing those examples is just that without standards, things can be confusing and ambiguous. So what are Family Search date and place standards? We could define them as the preferred way of entering dates and place names on family tree profiles. So what are the advantages? Well, we've alluded to some of them, but let's talk through them. For one thing, they make data entry a lot easier. So when you're typing in a date or a place, you don't have to wonder, oh my goodness, do I put the comma here or there, or what order do I put the names in or anything? You follow the Family Search standard and you just know what to do. They also improve searching and hinting in Family Tree. So as probably most of you are aware, in Family Search, when you're on a profile page, over on the right-hand side, there's a research help box. And in that box, there will often be hints either for possible duplicates or for sources to be attached. If we enter an ambiguous date, how does Family Search know what sources to give us? Because they rely on the correct date to give us the correct sources. So using standards improves those searching and hinting algorithms in the tree. And then finally, as we've kind of alluded to, they reduce ambiguity and confusion, which makes it easier for all of us to collaborate as we're building our family trees. So with that as a background, let's look at entering standardized dates. Sorry, I had to grab a drink of water there. Okay, so the date standard in Family Search is the day as a number, leading zeros aren't required, the month as a word, and the full year as a number. So you can see this example illustrates the correct format for dates in Family Search. If you don't have a complete date, you can also enter just a year or just a month in a year, as shown in these examples at the bottom of the screen. So how do you enter a date? Well, you open up the editing screen that has the date field, and then you type the date and the standards appear. I found that it's probably fastest just to create the habit of entering them in Family Search format with one small difference. If you entered, for example, 18 December 18 DEC 1904, the correct standard would still show up and you'd be able to click it. So if you want a little shortcut for entering dates, you can enter part of the month, but just be sure to click the correct standard when it shows up. You can also enter dates in other formats, and Family Search will do its best to try and figure out what you meant by that. But to me, that creates extra work, and we'll actually see an example of that on the next slide. But before we go to the next slide, I also wanted to say for those of you who love the keyboard over the mouse, maybe that's faster for your data entry, FamilySearch has made this friendly to keyboard users. So when you get a list of standards, you just use your arrow keys to navigate through them. When the highlight, this gray highlight, lands on the standard you want, you can just press enter and it will select that standard. So here's an example of entering an ambiguous date, the slash dates. When you, like I said, when you enter an ambiguous date, FamilySearch does its best to try and let you choose between what they think you mean. And usually they're pretty good unless this date has been completely mangled. So in this case, we've got the option of does this date mean the 5th of June or does it mean the 6th of May? And you would just click whichever date was appropriate. When a date is standardized, you can tell because not only is there verbiage underneath, but more obvious, the calendar icon shows next to the date. One reason I wanted to point this out is that if you're typing too fast, or sometimes if you click outside of the box or tab out and the standard hasn't been saved, and then you try to save the changes, save your changes, then the date might not be standardized correctly. Have any of you had this experience? Like I would quickly type a date like 1850, no day or no month, just 1850, then I'd very quickly save it, and I'd get out to the person page and the date would actually appear as 018, which was not at all what I intended. And I was just in too much of a hurry. So my advice to all of us is take a little time, make sure the calendar icon appears, and make sure that the date is appearing exactly as you wanted it, exactly as you meant to enter it. What about approximate dates? There's sometimes when we don't find an exact date or even an exact year, we can get pretty close. Well, FamilySearch has standards for that too. So if you don't have an exact date, you can use any of these standards: about, from, date to date, before or after. But here I am going to give a personal recommendation. This is not a FamilySearch recommendation, just my own opinion. But I came to this opinion after being misled by one of these before and after dates, and it made me realize how confusing they can be to users. So my personal recommendation is to avoid using before and after because of the confusion and because they can result in incorrect record hints. It's better to find the right date, or if it's not possible, to explain in a note. So let's look at an example of why this turned out to be problematic. So if you see something like this, that the person died after 1818, do you see that that's kind of open-ended? What does that even mean? Does it mean a year after? And I'm guessing most users would hope or think or expect that it's close, but actually there's a lot of years after 1818. Does that mean 5 years later? Does it mean 20 years later? We actually have no way of knowing. As I looked at this profile, it appeared to me that this date was based on the birth year of the last known child who was christened in 1818. So I think the reasoning in this person's head, and I know, well, I shouldn't say I know, but I suspect they absolutely had the best of intentions. So I expect that their reasoning was, well, I know that the woman was alive in 1818 because she gave birth, and I haven't found any other records yet to tell me when she died or how long she lived. So for now, I'm just going to put in that that she died sometime after 1818. But again, I'm guessing at that logic, and most users looking at that, it would, maybe they even wouldn't think through it, and I could totally understand that, or they wouldn't know how to interpret it. And also, when this happened to me, when someone had put one of these dates in after, I didn't realize it was an after date. So I actually thought it was the correct death date. So I was knocking myself out trying to find a death date for this person within a few years of this date. And of course, didn't find it. It turned out the woman had died, I think, a couple of decades afterwards. And so, anyway, that's just again, my personal opinion of trying to make it as clear to other users as possible and not to enter information in a way that could be confusing to other people. So less confusing options are find the actual death year, obviously, but if that's not possible, there's nothing wrong with leaving the death date blank while you do the research. And like we said earlier, you can leave an explanatory note. Okay, outdated standards to avoid. Were any of you doing family history around like the 1970s and the 1980s? If so, you probably remember these standards. Calculated, estimated, or est with a period, or angle brackets. So whenever you see dates in Family Tree right now that have angle brackets, they most likely came from older records when we were told to do this. We were told to put angle brackets around dates that were approximate as a visual indication that they were approximate. This was way before the days of Family Tree. Family Tree is so much more powerful now that we don't have to resort to these other standards that are actually, the first two are kind of, well, all of them actually, really are the same thing as about. So FamilySearch has an about standard. That's the one to use. One thing I did want to mention that while I was preparing this webinar and playing around with the system to make sure I was understanding how it worked, when you type in calculated or cal or estimated or est, the standardization that comes up is actually about. So you can force it to use calculated and estimated, but I wouldn't recommend that. Since FamilySearch has a standard, why not just use it? Why not get on board? And then that way everybody knows what we're talking about. Whoops, I think I went too fast there just a second. Okay, here's a thing that I wanted to illustrate. What if you see two dates on the editing screen? What I've noticed, some of you may be familiar with the old extraction program where records were put into old systems based on old standards and the dates are not following the current standards. So it used to be when we did extraction that we would put in a date with an abbreviated month. Well, the records came into Family Tree that way, and Family Tree, I'm not sure of the exact technical stuff behind this, but what I've observed is that they will keep the original date, but somehow they have recognized the standard and they've also included the standard. So that's really nice to let us know that was the original, this is the standardized, just in case there's any problem. But this also looks cluttered to me. Why have the date listed twice? Well, there's an easy way to fix it. To get rid of that double date, just click inside the date field, choose the right standard, and when you do that, the double date disappears. Okay, what about dates in other languages? So you notice here my interface is in English, of course, and the dates are all displaying in English. But when you use standards, the great benefit of that for other languages is that the proper translations will show in any languages that FamilySearch supports. But it's not quite as straightforward as you might think. So let's take a look. So the other day I changed my interface to French because I speak that language and I just wanted to see what would happen. So when I changed it to French, the date at the top was automatically standardized and translated to the correct format for French. But the part in the vitals section, the date in the vitals section wasn't. It was still English. However, when I clicked the pencil and got into the editing screen, which of course the interface is all in French, the original date is still there as entered in English, but the French standard appears below. So that's just a tip if you maybe, I know a lot of people are bilingual, they may switch back and forth between, say, Spanish and English or whatever. That's how these dates work when you switch back and forth between languages, as long as you have standardized them. Okay, last thing about dates. What about date like these little exceptions or whatever? What about non-Gregorian dates? If you're not familiar with different calendars, I'm not going to go into huge detail, but just suffice it to say that throughout time, different cultures have used different calendars. The calendar we use today is known as the Gregorian calendar, and Gregorian dates are the standard in Family Tree. So if you're entering dates from a society that used a different calendar, the recommendation is to use a calendar converter, such as this one right here. This is a live link. Oh, by the way, I will put a link in the chat at the end to this slide deck so that you can click on these links and just go straight there if you're interested. And you guys, if I forget to do that, will someone please remind me? Because on one of my earlier webinars, I said I would do it, and then I totally spaced it off at the end. So if I don't put it in, somebody remind me so that I be sure and do that. If you would like more information on entering dates and places, here is a link to the Family Search Help Center article. Okay, now let's talk about entering standardized places. Can you imagine what a moving target it is for FamilySearch to keep track of all geographic locations throughout all time, or at least all recorded history, including changes that are now taking place? As I think most of us are probably aware, boundaries change, names change. So my hat is off to FamilySearch for this wonderful tool that they've given us for finding out what place name we should use for a given place at a given time. So the standards database includes multiple geographic levels, from the smallest, such as a village or a hamlet, to medium, such as a town, city, or county, to the largest, such as a country or a sovereign state like the UK. It also includes some churches and cemeteries, which comes in handy when you're entering in for a place for, say, a christening, because of course, most of the time that would be done in a religious place, a church. And people are generally buried in cemeteries. And so to have those listed, I've noticed it's not complete yet, but FamilySearch is constantly, when I say not complete, what I mean by that is sometimes I can enter a place and find the cemetery, but sometimes there's not. The cemetery that I know is right is not in there yet. And so FamilySearch is constantly updating their place name database. And so if something isn't there now, most likely it will be in the future. Another great feature of FamilySearch's place database is that they include the date ranges for when the place existed, which is a wonderful help when you're going back in time and you're not sure, well, what was it called back then? Or just as a kind of humorous example, the other day I was looking at a record of a person that was born, I think their birthplace said like 1740 or something, and somebody had put in that they were born in New Jersey, but New Jersey was not in the United States. New Jersey was not a state until I think it was 1787. I Googled it, and that's to the best of my memory. So someone had entered a place that actually did not exist as such at that time. So that's why it's so helpful that FamilySearch gives us the date ranges, because it makes it easier for us to find the right place. So let's walk through entering places. Very similar to dates, you just start typing and the standards appear. When multiple places appear, these descriptions that we just mentioned and the date ranges, or actually we just mentioned the date ranges, sorry. The date ranges we mentioned as well as descriptions can help you pick the right place. So basically the rule is look at the event and then find the place whose date range contains that event. So this one is 1974 to the present. Well, that doesn't contain 1904, so that's the wrong one. Then we look at the next one, 1835 to 1974. That contains 1904, so we know that that's the one that we want to pick. Generally speaking, you want to choose a common geographic location. Sometimes you'll see places that don't look like geographic locations, such as in England, 100 or a civil registration district. Again, this is my personal opinion. I would avoid using weird places. So a civil registration district in England is just a government administrative district. And the reason I recommend avoiding using non-geographic places is just because of confusion or potential confusion. So for example, Ormskirk is a town, but as a civil registration district, it covers a lot more area than just that town. So if we choose Ormskirk, the civil registration district, people are probably going to interpret it as the town, and it could be misleading because the person who was registered here might have been registered in a completely different parish within this district, which did not have, the parish was not named Ormskirk, because Ormskirk has, like, as I recall, about 20 parishes in it with different names. So anyway, bottom line is I strongly recommend just using a geographic location that you recognize, like a village or a town or a city or a state or something that seems normal instead of something that you look at that and go, poor law union, what the heck is that? So that's my advice there. Okay, what if there is no standard for a place? Well, this can get a little bit tricky, so I thought I'd walk through with you an actual example. So somebody had entered the name Handon Hole, Durham, and I thought, oh, how cute. That sounds like one of those cute, quaint English place names. And I noticed that they had gotten it off the source, off her burial source. So it says that her last known residence was Handon Hole. So I started to type in Handon Hole, Durham, because I think the reason I did this was it had an error. So I started typing it in, and lo and behold, nothing comes up for Handon Hole. Notice it recognizes that I said Durham, so it gives me some Durhams in various places like England and Canada, but none of these standards contain Handon Hole. So I thought, well, maybe it's a little village inside a parish and it's just too small that it's not in the standards database yet. So I Googled it, and guess what? Handon Hole isn't a place. So I don't know if this was an indexing error or if somebody, if it was wrong on the original record and the person who wrote it down just did their best to write it down as they heard it. But a search revealed that the correct name is actually High Handon Hold, not Handon Hole. So we've got the right place, but guess what? High Hand and Hold is not in the database either. So at least we know we've got the right place. That was valuable for us to do that Google search and see what the right name is, but we've still got the same problem of not having a standard to choose. So whenever there's not a standard, FamilySearch has made it super easy to tell them that something is missing. So they've got a whole website. I think it's yeah, FamilySearch Places. It's right here on the screen. I was trying to remember the name. FamilySearch Places. If you go to this website, you can click Suggest a New Place, and then it gives you a form to fill out where you can give the information about this place so that they can look at it and consider it and decide whether to add it to their standards database. Once they add it, it would show up as a standard when you're trying to select that place. This is a live link right here. But this is the URL and it's really super easy. So if you just remember familysearch.org/research/places. And this, not to go off too much on a tangent, but this is like the coolest site. So in addition to suggesting a new place, you can search any geographic location by name or by latitude and longitude, and then it gives you information on that place. When was it officially a place? When did it stop? When did the boundaries change? It provides links to other information. This is actually one of my favorite sites. I think it's so cool for genealogists. So if you're interested in looking up information about places where your ancestors and your family lived, go to familysearch.org/research/places, and I bet you'll be surprised at what you find out. Here are a couple of other links to a Help Center article and a Research Wiki article that talk about this very helpful website. In the meantime, while you're waiting for that standard to be added, what are your options? Well, you've got two pretty good options. One is just to select the next highest geographic location, in this case, the County of Durham. But the other option, which I think is a really good one to tell you the truth because it's more specific, is notice when you start typing, what you type appears at the top in orange letters. If you type out the whole thing, that is what we hope the standard will be in the future, right? It's following all the current conventions, county, I was going to say Shire County, comma, England, comma, United Kingdom. So that's all in line. High hand and hold is the only thing that's not there yet. So what we can do is we can actually click that thing that we entered, that name that we entered, and then what happens is FamilySearch lets us keep that, although behind the scenes it standardizes to the next upper level. So when we go out to the profile page, when we exit this editing screen and go back out there, high hand and hold is what will show up. But behind the scenes, under the covers, FamilySearch is going to use this standard to come up with hints and duplicate matches and that kind of thing. So I find this valuable because I think even if a place is not in the standards database yet, but you know it's right, then that's helpful to other users to let them see what the correct place name is. Because a county is pretty broad. It's much nicer to have a more specific place name. Okay, gonna put a plug in here for reason statements, but we're not going into deep detail. Um, we've got a whole webinar on reason statements. So as I'm sure most of you, if not all, are aware, reason statements are supposed to be a brief explanation of why the information is correct. Where did you get it? How do you know that this date and place are right? Well, what I've noticed is that oftentimes when people standardize a date or a place, they will put in the reason statement standardized. But FamilySearch didn't ask us what we did or how we formatted it. They asked us the reason this information is correct. So using standardized as a reason statement is not going to be helpful to other users. So be sure that you use a correct reason statement. Really explain where you got that information, how you know it's correct, instead of just putting in, hey, I formatted it according to standards. Okay, we are to the last section of the webinar today. How do you fix standards errors? It's actually really easy, and we've already alluded to it, but I still felt like it was worth walking through. It's actually exactly the same as entering a standard. Well, almost exactly the same, but I still think the illustration will be helpful. So let's walk through it. When a place or a date does not match a FamilySearch standard, you get a helpful error message. So the error message shows up next to the non-standardized item, in this case a non-standard place, and it shows up over here under Research Help. So in order to fix this problem, we're going to click on the pencil by the non-standard information, and when we do that, we get the normal editing screen. So we want to click in the field or tap, like hit the space bar to make it. I mentioned that before, didn't I? I think that if you click in it and the standards don't appear, you can actually hit the space bar at the end to cause the standards to appear as well. Oh, it's right here on the screen. How funny. I was thinking I mentioned it earlier, but here it is. So let me do a take two on that just to be clear. Click inside the field where you want to do the standards. Normally the standards will drop down, but if they don't, a trick is to hit a space at the end of the standard and that will force the standards to drop down. So once you get the standards to drop down, you choose the correct standard for the date of the event. Ours is 1879, so we want to choose the date range that contains 1879, which is this one. And then when we choose that and we save, then the standardized information appears on the profile page and the error messages are gone. So that brings us to the end of our webinar today. We discussed standards, what they are and why they are helpful. We reviewed how to entertize. That's like trying to say standardize and enter at the same time. We discussed how to enter standardized dates, I can talk, and how to enter standardized places and how to fix incorrect standards. So everybody, thank you so much for joining us today. And I did remember that I need to put the link to this presentation in the chat. So I will do that right now. And after I do that, we'll entertain any questions. Okay, let's see. I got to scroll down and put so I'll put slide deck. There you go. So you should be able to click on that link in the chat and go straight to the slide deck that we used for today's presentation. So Olivia, do we have questions that we need to address?
Um, we did have a question from Robin, but I kind of forget what they were asking to repeat how you did something, and if you could do that with the cemetery too. Maybe they can clarify, Robin, if they
Oh,
still want to do that. It was like at 5:30, so not that long ago.
yeah, I can just pop over here and actually illustrate that. So let's say, Robin, I'm guessing you just want us to show how we did the standard. So actually, let me make this into a wrong standard. So if we've got this wrong standard, then the way that I get the right one is I'm going to click in here and I'm going to see the drop downs. And actually, let's see now I've forgotten what the correct one was. Let me go back out here. It was Castleford. So York was actually probably not a real good example there because York is an abbreviation for Yorkshire, the county, as well as Yorkshire, or York, the city. So let me see. Yeah, Robin is saying yes, correct. Oh, Gordon says it was the one where there is no standard and the closest one was in the background. Aha. Okay, I'm not going to save this, you guys, just so you know, I'm not going to mess up this thing. But it was the Holden Hole or whatever, wasn't it? What was the name of that? Handen Hole? So if I type in something that's not in the database, then it shows me what I typed here, but it shows all the closest matches down here. And the closest matches in this case, FamilySearch is assuming since I put Durham in the place where a county usually goes, that I probably want someplace in the county of Durham. So I can go ahead and choose that, and then it will standardize to Durham. But on the other hand, suppose that I wanted oh shoot, why can't I remember? I think it was Handen Hold, Durham, England, United Kingdom. And in this case, if I've done my research and I know that this is really a place, I'm confident that this is accurate information, then I click the orange text, and it is going to keep my orange text, or well, it's going to keep the text, put it in the christening place. Let me go back to the beginning so you can see that it really did that. But it's going to standardize to its next best guess. And if I don't like this, then of course I can edit this again. Robin, does this answer your question? If it doesn't, please ask a follow-up question. So let's see, I'm seeing how you got the missing place. Okay, yeah, sorry, I think that message I was reading is older. Okay, Robin says, got it, good deal, thank you. And I think I saw another question up here. Let me just look. Oh, Robin says, can you do this with a cemetery too? Yes, you can. So I actually don't know if this cemetery is in the database, so we'll give it a try. It's Oak Hills where my brother is buried. So we're going to say Oak Hills Cemetery. And mine's in San Jose. Yes. So some cemeteries are in there, Robin, to answer your question. So I would type the cemetery, see if it comes up. If it does, of course, you can select it. But if it doesn't, you could use the procedure that we just talked through, both to suggest the place and also to let it show up for users, even if it's not in the standards database. So now, so that I don't mess this record up, I'm going to hit cancel and make sure that the correct standard is still there. Okay, let me just look because I'm sure that I saw. Oh, Robin asks another very good question. So I had said don't put, let me go back in here just as an example. Don't put standardized as a reason. And she said, well, what if you don't know the reason? What if that's really all you did was standardize? That is a fair question. So what I do in cases like that, since standardized isn't a reason the information is correct, is I look at the sources and I try to figure out why this information is correct, and then I will write a good reason statement to tell why I believe it's correct. Unless that sound, I don't want that to sound like I do hours and hours of research, because I don't. I just look at like the attached source and I can say, oh, well, obviously the christening information came from this christening record and the parents match and the place is logical. And so I'll just put, I'll delete the word standardized and I'll type in a reason statement. So I'm going to cancel because I don't want to overwrite the reason statement that was there. So. Okay, let me look at the chat and see if there are any other questions. Okay, Robin says, I have hundreds of places that I've standardized by checking to make sure they are correct with the system. Why can't we simply use the system? So, Robin, I think what you're saying, please correct me if I'm wrong. If we've standardized the date, why do we even need to put in a reason statement? And why don't we just use the system standard? Is that what you're asking? Please let me know if that's not what you're asking. I'll wait to hear your answer on that before I comment further. Oh, no. Okay, she says no, she wants to put in the reason. This is a time when I wish we had audio. Shoot. So, Robin, I'm so sorry. Can you help me understand better why you're... Oh, when the only reason is the system, meaning FamilySearch. So actually that would not be the reason the information is correct, if I'm understanding you correctly. So whenever we put in information, the reason it's correct is that we've found it in a historical record, or we've spoken to somebody that knows, or we attended the funeral, we have firsthand knowledge. But we want to put, we want to we always have a source for, or we should always have a source of some sort for that information. So that's what we're trying to explain. That's why just using the system isn't enough. We want to justify that that information really pertains to this person whose profile we're updating. So what if the source is the record and the only thing I'm doing is matching it to the requirements of the system? Well, then the reason it's correct is because it appears on that source. So the fact that you're standardizing it is great and important, but again, it's not a reason the information is correct. So I would say just put in whatever explanation for why that you want to, for why the information is correct. But again, saying you standardize it does not prove that that information really pertains to this person on the profile. So I hope that's helpful, you guys. Oh, okay. Very good question. Robin is saying, so are you saying we can't standardize if there's no accompanying source? So I had not thought of that as a possibility because we should always have a source. But to Robin's point, suppose that she's editing a record and somebody else has put it in. They've put it in with the incorrect standard, but they don't have a source. And Robin looks and she's not able to find one. So in that case, I would probably put a note in instead. I wouldn't say that you standardized it as the reason, because again, sorry to I hate that metaphor, beat a dead horse. What's a better metaphor? Sorry to belabor the point overly, but again, don't put standardized as a reason because it's not a reason for the information. But instead, I would put a note saying, I just standardized the date, but there is no source, and I've looked and I cannot find where the person got this information. So that's just my recommendation on that, you guys. I hope that's helpful. And Robin, thank you for those excellent questions because they helped raise issues that I had not even thought of. And by the way, a minute ago, if I sounded a little like I was coming on strong, I have to explain this. I was actually coming on strong to myself because I was like, oh my gosh, they're going to be so annoyed because I keep saying this. So I apologize for that, repeating that probably too many times, but I do hope the information is helpful. Any other questions or comments? Okay, it looks like we are done for today. Olivia, I'll turn the time back over to you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for your questions. All right. Thank you so much everyone for joining us today. We hope you will join us for our next webinar, which is on January 22nd with Bob Taylor on new training tools in the Family History Guide. A recording of this webinar will be posted by the following Monday. And we thank you so much for joining in and have a wonderful week.
Oh, Olivia, can I stop really quickly? I just
Please,
noticed
yeah.
thank you so much. One more question. Is there a place to find the deck later? Yes. So the link to the slide deck, let me put that in the chat again. But also, I think Robin is probably referring to the recording as well. So here's the slide deck, but the recordings, let me just Google that really quickly. It's BYU Library webinars. And I will put this link in the chat as well. So within a few days, Olivia, how long does it usually take for the recording to be posted?
Just a few days. It should be up by this weekend or Monday.
Okay, awesome. So just a few days. And when it is posted, it will appear in the webinar library. So here is the link, and I will throw that in the chat. So link, whoops, helps if I could type, huh? Link to webinar library. There you go. So that is where you will go to find the recording once it's posted. Thanks again, everybody. And Robin, you're very welcome. Thanks for all your excellent questions.